I'm Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash, the redemption of an American icon. We have a book, now we've got a documentary. What made you commit to being a part of this?
Well, it was my father's mission in life. Probably his number one mission was to be, witness for Christ and to share his faith with people.
There's no lonelier place on earth for a man to be than separated from God.
He always had faith in God throughout his life. When he was at the top of his game and he was the number one artist in the world, he still professed his faith.
Success, all the partying, all the money, all the fame, all that, something is not going to last.
And you begin to realize there's got to be something more.
Past that is a guy who's broken and knows he needs God.
I mean, this is a documentary that covers everything about my father. It truly does. But the focus is on his redemption.
He faced his temptations, he faced his worldliness, and came out wanting to be right with God.
There are many parts of this documentary that are incredibly fascinating. I love hearing his voice also sharing the story. What was it like to listen to those recordings, to see them play out on the screen there?
He surely had to think back and say, was it all worth it?
We were all young and wild and crazy.
How crazy were you?
All as crazy as you can get.
There were a lot of those recordings that we came across just within the past few years.
Wow.
And so I remember who my father was at the time. I remember what he believed in. I remember his sense of humor. So I'm reminded of who he was when I hear those recordings. And there's things in this documentary that that my father never shared anywhere else.
What would you say is, I guess, the newest thing or surprising thing for you to learn? It would be hard to imagine that you're learning something new having spent your life with him, but
there's insight into into his own connection with his father, the way that they healed their relationship later in life, insight into his feelings about his brother Jack, who passed away when my dad was 12 years old and Jack was 14. There's so much there really is, and then there's so much insight into who my dad was and what he meant to various people. I mean, there's everybody from Alice Cooper to my father's sister Joanne that's interviewed for this documentary, and so there's a varied insight into who my father was and what he meant to different people.
There was not one person that didn't respect Johnny Cash.
He sort of lived in his own atmosphere.
His unapologetic attitude, that's what made Johnny Cash cool.
we also learn a bit more about the love connection between your mom and dad too in this. I mean, she was incredible to him.
Yeah, I think that people walk up to me and they ask me, they say, what's it like to be a product of the greatest love affair that ever was? And I'm like, well, you evidently weren't there. There was a lot going on, but what is beautiful about their relationship is that it endured, and that through the fire, through the struggles that they had, that they did stay together, and that in the end they were closer together than they ever had been. And I think they would have rather had it that way than not. There's a lot to learn from it. There truly is, about long suffering, about the fruits of the Spirit, about the blessings that are to come through staying together and through the struggles that go along with it sometimes.
He was darkness and light living in the same body, and one fought against the other.
There's a lot of talk in the film about the struggle between light and dark.
Yeah.
And I mean, even the fact that your dad's known as the man in black, I mean, that constant struggle. What would you say about that dynamic? Was it something you witnessed or were able to see?
Johnny told me I'm my happiest when I'm performing. But sometimes Cash gets into trouble.
I mean, my father was he'd said it himself, it's like he was two people. I mean, there was Cash, who was the performer, who had the ego that wanted what he wanted and wanted to feel more of it, that struggled with addictions. And then there was John, my dad, who was a gentle, kind man, always loving, always forgiving, always considerate, thoughtful of other people. But I think by the end of my father's life, he had a lot of connection with understanding who he was and what really mattered to him as a person and as a Christian.
How did he pass on that faith to you?
by walking the walk. You know, he gives me strength today to continue when I look into the eyes of my children. And he was asked by Larry King on live television one time, what would be the most important legacy that he could leave behind? What's the most important thing? And his answer was that he would be a good father. And so I remember that, and that was when my father was very ill, you know, at the end of his life, and looking and thinking, you know, not thinking about the gold you can't carry into the ground, but looking into the eyes of his children and his grandchildren, and believing that he was there for them. And so that's the legacy that in the end that I hope my children can connect also with, is that I hope to be a good father, and he was that to me likewise.